Not everything that's illegal isn't criminal. That's the thought that ignites the death of Saul Goodman and the rebirth of Jimmy McGill. Using the legal talent and trickery of the persona everybody knows him by, Saul is able to reduce his sentence to something that is not morally just. But it's what the legal system cooks up. There's no corruption. Saul shows the prosecutors his defense strategy, and they decide the risk of facing him in trial warrants a reduction in prison time. But deep down, Saul recognizes that the legal system's punishment is not sufficient. Not sufficient given the laws he's broken and the relationships he's destroyed. He decides that spending the rest of his life in prison as Jimmy McGill is more desirable than roaming the streets of Albuquerque as Saul Goodman. So he takes his brother's advice and changes course. There is a lot to go through in the series finale of Better Call Saul as expected. The title of the episode gives away the arc, Saul Gone. It is a story of how Saul Goodman falls at the hands of Jimmy McGill and Kim Wexler. It is her decision to come clean that causes Saul to consider doing the same, so it's a joint effort. There are many cameos, some of which I expected, some I did not, but all of the cameos are included to show us why Jimmy eventually comes clean in that courtroom. And sticking true to Breaking Bad universe tradition, it is a flashback with Mike Ehrmantraut that kicks off the start of our main character's redemption. The opening shots of the episode frame the conversation Jimmy has with Mike and the conversations we see later in the episode. We are shown two items back to back, relics from the season 5 episode Bagman. One is of the thermal blanket, a symbol connecting to Chuck, and the other is cold hard cash. Many characters believe that Saul's actions were solely aimed at acquiring the latter. And this is what Jimmy tells Mike. If I could go back in time, I would just invest in successful companies. That's all there is. The reality, as we know by now, is that Saul Goodman's main utility was suppressing the pain of losing Chuck and the other people he loved. Up until this episode, Jimmy is unable to admit that. But Mike, on the other hand, is able to take responsibility for his regrets. That's why initially, he says he'd go back to December 2001, which is presumably the day his son was killed. By going to that day, he's putting the blame on Maddie's killers. But then he revises it to the day he took his first bribe, because that was the day the die was cast. And Mike doesn't try to avoid the pain of accepting that truth. This is surely a moment that Jimmy will remember. And on a side note, Jimmy's suggestion to keep Lalo's money is a nod to the conversation they have in season 1 about keeping the Kettleman's stolen money. Jimmy doesn't take the Kettleman's money because he was trying to live up to the expectations of Chuck, but later regrets that decision when he finds out that Chuck was smothering his law career. After that fantastic start to the episode, we return to the black and white world of Gene. His attempt to get bailed out again by the vacuum man is a massive fail, and he gets appropriately arrested inside of a garbage can. Unfortunately, this humiliation does not kill his narcissism. He tells Bill on the phone, "This is going to end like everything else, with me on top." And also note how Bill, despite knowing him best as Jimmy, calls him Saul. Everybody in episode 13 does the same except for Chuck and Kim, if I'm not mistaken. Saul is confronted by Marie, a fantastic and unexpected inclusion, and must listen to the human cost of his crimes. But it doesn't crack his shell even a little bit. He sticks to Saul's moral code, which is, do whatever the hell you can to salvage the most comfortable situation for yourself. If that means comparing yourself with a murdered man and his widow, well, you gotta do it because life is just wolves and sheep. And Saul also harkens back to the cancer guy by saying, if that prison was good enough for Madoff, it's good enough for me. Jimmy's final victim tells him in the bar that people like Madoff belong in the darkest pit of hell. Now, speaking of wolves and sheep, we get one last meeting with the wolf that is so frequently mentioned this episode, Walter Hartwell White, and it is a brilliant scene, although it took me a couple viewings to get what they were trying to do with it. The scene begins with Walt attempting to fix a corroded thermocouple. In typical Walt fashion, even the smallest of annoyances must be taken care of, but the repair job is not about Walt's OCD. It's about why he becomes Heisenberg and why Jimmy becomes Saul. The two men offer different solutions to the problem. Saul says, "Can't we just unplug it or cut it?" And Walt says, "No, it can be easily fixed." That tiny exchange is representative of the larger conversation they will have about regrets. When Jimmy asks a question, Walter initially looks down at the watch that Jesse bought him. This scene occurs right after Walt hands Jesse over to Jack to get tortured and killed, but that wound is too fresh, so Walt speaks of a different regret that does seriously bother him, and that is what happened with gray matter. Walt doesn't cut that memory out completely. He alters it to fit his narrative. Instead of accepting the truth, which is that he left Gretchen and Grey Matter because he was extremely insecure, he tells Jimmy that he was victimized by the schemes of his partners. Walter's resentment is what animates his transformation into Heisenberg, and this scene highlights that so well. I loved it, and Bryan Cranston is fantastic. Saul, on the other hand, doesn't try to reveal a highly fabricated regret. He doesn't say, "Well, I regret marrying Kim Wexler because she was a backstabber who hated me." Again, that's Walt's angle. Saul buries the true answer, and you get the sense that he's asking people about their regrets just so he can say that he doesn't have any big ones himself. Aside from the main thematic purpose, there are a couple other things I found interesting about the Walter scene. Number one, this scene happens a few months before Saul is arrested, and he looks like young Jimmy. I suspect this is a scheduling thing. Maybe Cranston could only come by certain days when Bob Odenkirk was doing main timeline scenes. I'm not sure, but I wish they could have maintained continuity on that front. Also, there's a couple of shots splitting the room in half, the main characters getting their own side. On Walt's side, he has his barrel of money. On Jimmy's side, there's an empty chair. That could be nothing, but in my own mind, it's sort of reflective of what broke the two men. For Jimmy, the departure of the people he cared about, and for Walter, the desire to be wealthy, powerful, and in control. After Jimmy learns that Kim has come clean about Howard's death, he has a change of heart. Her courage to take responsibility inspires him to do the same. So he pulls one final trick to get her into the courtroom, and then strolls in wearing Saul's equivalent to a superhero costume. And my favorite part about the suit is the ribbon that Saul never removed, which was meant to memorialize the airline crash that Walter caused. It sums up the nature of Saul's character quite well. The key shot of Saul's entrance is this one, the handcuffs being removed. The image symbolizes what Saul is about to do for himself. He's going to remove the constraint that is the Saul persona, a persona that killed his ability to connect with others and develop meaningful relationships. It's partly a personal endeavor, but Saul's admission of truth is also targeted at Kim. This shot drives home that point. She was a witness when Jimmy humiliated Chuck in chicanery. The buzzing of the exit sign is a superb callback to that episode, and she was also present when Jimmy pretended to be remorseful about Chuck's death. Having Kim there allows him to correct the record. It allows him to show her that his true feelings about those events are not permanently buried. By finally coming clean about his regrets, the foundation on which Saul Goodman was built crumbles. He no longer serves any purpose. There was a lot of speculation about whether Jimmy would make this decision. He depended on Saul for a long time. That internal war makes Chuck's opening words in the flashback very powerful. When Jimmy walks through the front door, Chuck says, "I was starting to worry." The scene with Chuck is fantastic. We see how Jimmy was also culpable for their dysfunctional relationship. He does what he believes is his responsibility as Chuck's brother, but that's it. Chuck is a lonely man who used to talk for a living, but Jimmy decides to not stick around and chat because he suspects that Chuck just wants to criticize him. And then Chuck fires back by asking if he stole ice from a motel. They both had reasons for expecting the worst from each other, but those expectations severely damaged their brotherly bond. The two were in a perpetual state of competition. They wanted things to be different, but could never bear culpability for their share of the problem. And that was the only path to healing. Because of this mutual shortcoming, Chuck and Jimmy end up in the same situation. They both yearn for change, a way to go back and fix the errors they internalize. Hence their mutual interest in H.G. Wells' novel The Time Machine, which we've seen a couple times before in Season 6. Tragically, Jimmy is not able to go back and mend his relationship with Chuck, and Odenkirk does a phenomenal job portraying Jimmy's desperation to do so, but he does manage to repair things with Kim, as far as they can be repaired. I wish they would have ended the series with the old flame coming back for one last cigarette and Jimmy delivering a final one-liner. I thought that was perfect, but they wanted this to be the lasting image, separate rather than together. They understand each other now, the air is clear, but there will be no final kiss and fade out. It's an understandable choice, and maybe it will turn out to be the right one for the show's legacy. Saul Gone wasn't perfect, they could have trimmed it a little bit. Namely, Kim's return to the law office, I don't think her character needed that. And the little chant on the bus. I like the idea of the prisoners calling Jimmy Saul, but that was a step too far for me. But despite those slight missteps, the ending lived up to my expectations. It was a proper send-off for all the characters. And in particular, I thought the scenes with Chuck and Walter were really special. Walter was able to slightly redeem himself at the end of Breaking Bad by admitting the truth of his actions to Skyler and rescuing Jesse. The price of that redemption was his life, which, to be fair, was on its last leg anyways, but it would have been easier for Walter to wallow away in self pity, blaming Jesse and Skylar for his downfall. The end of Jimmy's story is very similar. He admits the truth to himself and to Kim at the expense of a free life. But to quote a wise fictional pirate, it's not about living forever, the trick is living with yourself forever. And that is what James Morgan McGill will now be able to do, despite ending up in a cage alongside the people he used to defend. It hurts me to say this, but the Breaking Bad universe is over. And what an unbelievable achievement it is. It gave us some of the best, if not the best, characters in the history of television. Visually, the world was presented in a way totally unique from anything shown on TV before, and the Wall Street Journal actually wrote a great article about their innovation on that front, which I'll leave a link to below. There were some hiccups here and there. I'll never be totally satisfied with Lalo's death, but the stories from this world are unique in a time when stories are not getting better, and there are a number of reasons for that financially and culturally, but Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould created characters and stories that ventured to the deepest realms of human experience, and it was one hell of a ride. I have another video planned that will cover what I think the moral of the story is for the overarching narrative of Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, so be on the lookout for that in the near future, and make sure to leave your thoughts on the series finale in the comments. Did it surpass Breaking Bad for you? Did it fall a bit short? I'm sure there will be a wide range of opinions on that. Thanks again guys for watching my Season 6 videos, it was a lot of fun. Maybe Gilligan's next original show will be worthy of a similar series, who knows. But have a fantastic rest of your day. I will talk to you soon.